Welcome to the Disney Parks Podcast with your hosts, Tony Caselnova from DisneyByTheNumbers.com and Parkhopper John from WDWParkhoppers.com. Keep your hands, arms, feet, and legs inside the podcast at all times. And get ready for the Disney Parks Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Disney Parks Podcast. We're very excited to bring this guest to you. It's a fascinating story. It's a very unique aspect of the world of Disney that maybe you didn't know. Our guest is Dave Randle, who is the Director of Sustainable Tourism with the USF Patel College of Global Sustainability and President and CEO of the Whale Center. I'm fascinated to get into this topic. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Dave. How are you doing tonight?
Doing great, and thanks for inviting me to be on your program.
Thank you for being here. It's very fascinating. Tony came across an article. I think that's what started this whole thing. So let's go ahead and get into this podcast. We always have this one question that we ask every guest. How did your Disney journey begin?
Right.
Wow. It actually began in 1955 when my parents took me to Disneyland within 6 weeks after it first opened. And we made that a regular thing living in Southern California. I remember dressing up in my Davy Crockett outfit with my coonskin cap, my Betsy airgun rifle, my plastic powder horn, and plastic fringe on my buckskin suit. And people would come by and they'd go, "Hey, Davy, how's it going?" And I'd go, "Mom, how'd they know my name?" You know?
That's awesome.
But then, Disney had, that was the place where I was able to go with friends without parents and spend the whole day. It was where we did our high school graduation and the place where, the special place you took your date and so forth. So I grew up in Southern California with Disneyland. And then later, I worked on a project called Breakthrough to Excellence, which my team teamed up with the Disney team, and we co-produced these seminars at Walt Disney World. And then I got more involved with Disney World, and as I moved out to Florida, I became a regular pass holder and fan of Disney.
Wow.
That's great.
It's, I always like talking to people that were at Disneyland early on because it's so changed and it evolved into something completely different.
Yeah. The first day, I got pictures actually, the first time we went there, where the Matterhorn Mountain is now, used to be orange groves. Wow. And people used to bring their picnic lunches and pick some oranges sometimes off the trees to add to their lunch, where the Matterhorn is now. And I ran into Walt Disney twice, and just don't do those kind of things anymore.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
That's sad.
Okay.
That makes us sad.
This has nothing to do with what we're talking to you about, but what was Walt Disney like in real life?
Well, the first time I met him, it was actually, he used to have an apartment above the firehouse.
Right.
And he was interested in, actually my younger brother and cousin were playing on the area there, and he motioned my parents that he wanted to come over and see them. It was really them, not me. And I, be honest, didn't know who he was. I was, like 5 or 6 years old, and
right.
they told me that he owned the place. And so my first question was, does he know Davy Crockett? So that was what I was interested in. But years later, when I was around 15, I just ran into him on Tom Sawyer's Island, the raft there, and he actually came up to me and he started asking me questions about what I thought about this and that. And what I remember most about it was not even what he asked and what I said, because I don't really remember the specifics of either, but I remember just being so overwhelmed that somebody like this, because by then I did know who he was, would take the time to ask a kid his opinion and want to know what I thought. So that really impressed me.
Yeah, that's cool. That's good stuff. It's a shame it can't happen now.
Yeah, truth.
Yeah.
All right, so give us an overview of what the Village's nature is all about. What's the concept? What is Disney's? What's this project about, Dave?
Sure. Well, Disney has partnered with a French developer, Pierre Vacances, who specializes in forest development and preservation of biodiversity. And Disney brings to the table their experience of education and children and their work with climate change. And they teamed up together to create what they had as a goal, the most sustainable tourism resort in the world. And by all measurements, they seem to really have accomplished that. To give you a few examples, 100% of the resort is powered by geothermal energy for all their heating needs. But they didn't stop there. They've now piped it into Euro Disney, and they're supplying 30% of the theme park and 30% of the Disneyland Paris Hotel with their energy as well. So they're not just carbon neutral, they're actually taking carbon away because they're converting what used to be carbon sources of energy into renewable energy now. 100%, 98% rather, of the waste during construction was diverted away from landfill, which is an incredible number. And now they're in operation, 100% of it is diverted away from a landfill. They have a farm on property. They have fair trade and organic food contracts with the local farmers. They have a huge emphasis on involving locals in the project and the program and being really good neighbors with the community. They've put in all the energy efficient designs and appliances. And to my amazement, even though they have these incredible gardens and amazing landscaping throughout the entire village, they use zero fertilizers and zero pesticides, and they still get these incredible results. So those are some of the highlights I can share. And of course, the big one with the water park, there was no water park in Euro Disney. This is the first one, and to do all that with geothermal, so the guests are actually going down these slides or drops and ending in these geothermal pools is quite an incredible experience, especially in the wintertime for us in Florida.
Right. So this is like, the closest thing that we have even remotely like this is like living with the land. When you take the boat ride and you go through and you see, the sustainable vegetation, and it talks about different ways of farming, how we can utilize the resources. We don't have to, always, create waste and use carbon emissions and all that good stuff. This is actually taking that into real world on a massive scale. Yeah,
and the thing that was interesting when I asked them how they, really came up with this design, they worked with a group in the UK called One Planet Living. And One Planet Living came to Disney Imagineers and Pierre Vacances with a very simple concept. They said, if you live like the average European, which is where this resort is in Europe, it would take 3 planets of resources if everybody in the world lived that way. And if you live like us North Americans, we need 5 or 6 planets to live the lifestyle we're living. So the challenge they gave Disney and Pierre Vacances was to develop a resort as if there was only one planet. And they actually were able to achieve that, which is really quite remarkable. And it's really become now a model for sustainable tourism around the world to look at, is how we can develop in the future, not only tourism resorts, but our communities and cities as well.
Right. Yeah. So the people who are designing this and creating this, did they initially start working with Disney? Was this something that Disney initiated, or was it just something they were invited into?
Well, as I understand it, Disney owned the land already. It's right next to the Davy Crockett Ranch, if you've ever been to Euro Disney and know the geography. And this is land that would have been zoned for a resort that Disney had held for some time, and Pierre Vacances being, in France and having a reputation of this kind of resort. Apparently, the CEO of both Euro Disney and Pierre Vacances were good friends and got together one night and decided to do this joint venture 50-50, and that's how it came to be.
In your article in the Huffington Post, there were some terms that I was very unfamiliar with, but can you tell us a little bit about what sustainable tourism is and what that really means?
Yeah, it probably could be a whole hour lecture, but in short, sustainable is to use our resources in a way that we provide for an ongoing renewal and leaving things not just for ourselves but future generations. So, for example, when you're cutting a forest sustainably, you would only cut as much as would allow to be regrown. So you would always have continued cycle of forests to harvest, and there'd be something left for generations, after you were gone. So what they're trying to do with sustainable tourism is to take all of these areas, be they waste management or water management or energy management or the wildlife preservation or the economy, and that includes wages and benefits for employees, and make it so it's sustainable that you could continue this on forever.
When you're talking about that type of creating of parks and theme parks and in complete areas for tourism, is Disney thinking about making this a global initiative? I mean, they're already doing a lot. I know about Walt Disney World. I can't speak to Disneyland, but I know there's a lot of things that Disney does to help promote sustainability, but also to downplay the amount of trash and pollution that we create. Is Disney thinking about taking this on a global outreach or what?
Well, I know that when I talked with Joe Rohde about this at the inauguration, they sounded like they were thinking of taking this to China as the next stop. And he had mentioned that it would be fun to do something in Florida, though I don't know that there's any plans to do that. But I'm sure that there's thinking, for that. It would be, I think, a very attractive thing for people in the United States to have at Walt Disney World, and not just have to go to Euro Disney to see this or China, if that's where the next one is.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I know that there was a lot of, at least on the front end, the first few weeks of Shanghai being open, there was a lot of problems with some trash and some other things that were discovered around the park. So I'm sure that that's something that Disney, they've already fixed those problems, but moving forward, that's an initiative that Disney certainly is probably very, very concerned about and very passionate about implementing in their parks. Right. And Disney is a global leader in sustainable tourism field, already with their commitment to becoming a net carbon zero company and acknowledging climate change and their corporate social responsibility to address that, and setting a goal to have become a company with zero waste to landfill, which is pretty amazing. You think of all the trash generated, that none of that ever goes to a landfill. Yeah. And what was impressive to me in 2008, when they set their new corporate environmental goals, one of them was to not do any more development unless it had a positive impact on ecosystems. And that's quite amazing, to think of a developer making that kind of commitment. And I know of one instance where that got tested, where they have a resort with the cruise lines called Castaway Cay, and they had an opportunity to purchase a second island to develop a second kind of Castaway Cay. The problem was this particular development was going to destroy massive acres of coral reefs. And so the challenge then was, how do we put enough positive benefits so the net is going to outweigh the negative we do with destruction. So while the development side and the environmental science side are kind of debating and arguing with each other internally within Disney,
Bob Iger stepped in and said, "You guys are crazy. We can't mitigate this. This project's dead." So they never did it. So that's real corporate commitment to me. That's pretty amazing when somebody takes that kind of ethical stance to do something like that.
Right. Yeah. We see that a lot because we bring a lot of every week we bring Disney news. And we talk about different announcements like, Star Wars Land, Toy Story Land, and, even going back to the new Fantasyland projects. And one of the pieces of news that we talk about that I'm not sure that everybody outside of Florida really understands is the piece where, they work with the South Florida Water Management and they understand that Disney made a commitment to a large percentage of Walt Disney World will always be kept as wetlands. And so they're always having to trade off, well, this part is going to be, we're going to reclaim some of this wetlands and turn it into a part for a theme park. And then we have to find some more areas that we can transform into wetlands to keep that percentage up. Yeah. So, at least from our experience with Walt Disney World, Disney is really keeping up with that commitment. So that's amazing to hear that even Bob Iger was.
Yeah, in fact, the wetland story is an interesting one with Disney because, when Walt revealed the plans for Walt Disney World, he declared from the very beginning that 1/3 of the land would always be set aside for conservation and wildlife. And so when the whole idea transformed from being a city, which he initially intended, to one of theme parks, they decided they needed to develop some area which was going to possibly mean destroying about 650 acres of wetlands. And that, was really hard to justify given that they were supposed to save 1/3, because who's to say that the area they're going to destroy, wasn't supposed to be preserved, and because they didn't really map out which third was going to be there. So that it was a very difficult situation. And the solution was they bought a ranch that was up for sale at the headwaters of the Everglades. It's about a half hour from Walt Disney World, called the Disney Wilderness Preserve. And they spent $25 million to purchase this 8,000 acres of land. And then they gave it over to the Nature Conservancy and added on to that $5 million to them so they'd have continually funding to operate it with the mission to restore it to wetlands. So now we've got a trade-off where there's possibly going to be 600 acres destroyed, but you're going to benefit by getting up to 8,000 acres more. And so when that started happening, the airport and other developers said, hey, let us pay some of that $25 million. We need these permits too. And Disney said no. Said, if you want to do it, you buy additional land.
That's right.
So now the Disney Wilderness Preserve is 12,000 plus acres. Wow. It's the place where NASA does its research on climate change and wetlands, because it's the only place in Florida they know is perpetually going to be available to study, because it's not going to be developed. And they build a little visitor center where they demonstrate all kinds of technologies like passive solar and active solar and geothermal heating and cooling. And it's a beautiful little hike around the wetland lake there at the headwaters of the Everglades. So that's really a commitment. And it turned out they didn't destroy anywhere near the 600 acres anyway. It was like 200 or 300 acres.
Wow. I as a former cast member, I know they here in Florida they try to recycle, reuse, and repurpose. Even when they do like demolition, I know nowadays they try to bring everything back to the environmental center and try and reuse it, repurpose it, or put it to good use or get rid of it in the proper way rather than tossing it in the landfill. And I think I had heard that most of the paper trash is burned or turned into fuel. Do you know anything about?
Yeah, they have a massive biodigester.
Yeah,
and and the trash that goes in on Main Street, from those trash cans in the restaurants and things goes through a chute that goes into that biodigester, and then they bring it all over from Epcot and other Hollywood studios and so forth as well.
Right.
And that produces 5.3 megawatts of energy, which is a huge energy source from the trash that gets sorted and used in that biodigester.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, you mentioned that Joe Rohde was also involved with this project. What involvement did Joe have with the Villages?
Joe was the head of the team for Disney, and he was the co-director with Terry Hu, who is the Pierre Vacance's co-director person, and the two of them were the ones really in charge of everything for the design and development. Imagineer Frank Heatherton was the one who did the on-the-ground, design and day-to-day operational stuff. But Joe was the one that sent Frank from the Californian office to France to live for a few years for this project.
Unpacking this a little bit more about the Villages Nature Paris, what's their ultimate vision? I mean, they've got the theme park. They're proving that these concepts and ideas and technology can work. What's their ultimate vision for this area?
Well, I think what this is kind of a labor of love in many ways. The mission of Village Nature is to help people reconnect to nature. And that has been shown in a lot of research is ultimately the one thing that will help change attitudes and values in culture and society, so people will, Jacques Cousteau used to say it this way, people protect that which they love. And so if you're in love with something, you're going to fight to protect it much more than, if you just have campaigns to tell how bad it's going to be. We're going to have all this disaster from climate change or ocean acidification or water shortages. And, that might generate short-term interest, might even get contributions or even some votes, but it's not going to be long-term. The long-term is going to be helping to connect people to nature and to realize that we need to live in harmony with this planet and not try to be the master of it.
Is it going to be like, I was thinking with Joe's design, and maybe it's going to be more Animal Kingdom-ish, lush greens and properties and gardens and things like that. Is that, I think, where they're going with it?
Oh, yeah, that's already there. In fact, they have different sections. One, maybe I should share a little bit about the different sections. The main village area is called the Promenade, and all of these buildings literally have hanging gardens on the buildings themselves. And then behind the buildings, they have 4 gardens that are themed earth, air, water, and fire. And in each of those gardens, you'll see plants and landscaping that fits around that theme. So obviously in the water garden, you see all the streams and you see little geysers, shooting up. In the fire garden, you'll see like lava rock, and the earth garden, you'll see more, vegetable fruit tree kinds of things. And the air gardens, you'll see windmills and things turning in the wind and stuff. But there's activities for families and kids to enjoy this and learn about it, through nature. And all of this garden and the hanging gardens and the buildings and so forth are all done, again, with no pesticides and no fertilizers, which to me is really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
And then the centerpiece is the Aqualong, which is their water park, and that's using all geothermal energy to heat the water at 30 degrees Celsius, which is about 86 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. And they have a number of water slides, and inside they have very lush vegetation. You feel like you are in the Animal Kingdom or somewhere like that, in that area. And one of my favorite areas to visit was the legend, the forest legends, Legend of the Forest. And what they're doing there is they designed this activities where kids can kind of get into the mythical forest legends, and they tell them things, and they have like climbing things and so forth. And when they were testing it out, they found out they had one problem, And the problem was the parents that were bringing them wanted to play too, and so they had to change it to a family-oriented activity rather than just a kids' activity, and that's been a really fun thing for kids to do. And then they have the farm, and the farm actually does grow some of the food that is used in the restaurants, just like the land. It's obviously not enough to grow for all the restaurants and the food needs of everybody any more than the land pavilion at Epcot is. But it teaches people how our food is grown. They can learn how to compost. They can learn how to bring things to life in their own gardens back home. They can learn about animal husbandry, with their horses and cows and so forth. And you literally get a farm-to-table meal of eat at the restaurant there because it's really right there grown at the farm and brought right to the table where you're eating in that farm area. So those are some of the major themed areas in Village's nature, and each of them, is unique and gives an opportunity. Joe Rohde said that the idea was not just to have an intellectual, exercise of escape, but really to create more harmony with a poetic ideal. And to do that, they've deliberately created two major metaphors. One is the metaphor of the garden, bringing harmony with humankind and nature everywhere that you look, and they've done that very successfully. And the second is the metaphor of bringing the power of the geothermal energy to the surface where you can actually see it and experience. So in their mind, it's not an escape, but actually a voyage into a positive future that will inspire all of us to do things not just when we're at Village Nature, but when we go back home in our own communities as well.
Wow, that's amazing. You had said something right before we started recording. Village Nature wasn't the original name for this area, was it?
No, it was Disney Village Nature.
And why did they drop the Disney part?
Well, I'm sure there were many reasons, but the one that I heard that I think is probably the correct one is there was real concern that if you put the name Disney on it, people would have expectations when they stayed there that they'd be seeing Disney characters like Mickey and Minnie and Donald and Goofy and stuff around the village, and there's really none of that. In fact, I was surprised that even the stores are themed, like they have an adventure store where you can buy things to use out in nature, and there's no branding for Village Nature. Some people had asked me to bring them back some Village Nature souvenirs, and the only thing I could find that even said Village Nature on it in the entire village was in one restaurant they had a coffee cup that said Village Nature. And there was no T-shirts, there was no hats, There was nothing else. And in all the shops, there wasn't any branding of Village Nature other than that one coffee cup. And I thought that was quite amazing. But that was keeping to the theme of what they're trying to do is make everything oriented to a nature connection, not to a branding connection for the Disney characters or things like that.
So is there an actual resort at this site?
Yes, yeah. There's like 1,200 units where you stay in different kinds of cottages, and each of them is designed with a passive solar design. And in fact, Frank Heatherton, the master planner, when I asked him, you put all these new technologies and energy efficiencies and so forth into your resort, what did you find was the most, innovative and beneficial of everything you did? And Frank said, well, it's a little embarrassing. And I said, why is that? And he says, because it's not new. It's something the Anasazi Indians were doing 1,000 years ago. It was using passive solar design. But the passive solar design has enabled them to not only cut their heating bills down to zero, but also they don't have any air conditioning needs either. Wow. So eliminating the air conditioning and the heat through the passive solar design was one of the major gains in the architectural design and planning. I stayed there a few weeks ago, and I stayed there during the inauguration. So it's open for business, and you can go to the resort and stay there. And you walk into they have their version of the magic bands, and the bands open your room. They give you the pass into the water park. They actually are set up so they unlock your locker and lock your locker up in the locker room area for the water parks and so forth. So they're using all that kind of technology. There's no cars allowed in the village. And they have electric run shuttles powered by geothermal and solar energy that transport people around the village area itself. So they've eliminated cars. There's a high-speed train right from Charles de Gaulle Airport you can get on, and it takes, they say, 9 minutes to get to Euro Disney. I timed it. It actually took 10. But the buses take an hour to an hour and a half, depending on traffic. So it's quite a remarkable time saving with the high-speed rail. Yeah. And from there, it's about a 20-minute shuttle to the village itself from Euro Disney.
That was my next question. How far away from Disneyland Paris is this?
We
were there. I was there a couple years ago. Had I known this was there, I would have tried to go see this. It sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, a couple of years ago, it wasn't open. I visited first last May, and they were still doing the construction in May, and they officially opened October 10th last year, and I was there for the inauguration for that, and I was there just a few weeks ago because I'm doing some follow-up research on their sustainability efforts, and so I met with their staff and did some follow-up from the last visit. But so I've seen it in different seasons now, and it's beautiful any time of year to go there.
I was reading in the article that you had published, the 10 values of the villages. Can you talk maybe about just a couple of them? You don't have to go through all 10 of them, obviously. But, what are maybe, the top 2 or 3 that, they're trying to promote?
Yeah, well, they're trying to integrate all 10 of these, which are called the One Planet Living principles. The ones that they're emphasizing the most and most successful in are the energy use, which they're having zero carbon energy impact, and they're not only doing zero carbon impact for themselves, they're taking it away from the Disneyland theme parks and the Disneyland Paris Hotel. The other one that I think they're really big on is the local and sustainable food, and they're really living that more fully than any resort I've ever been to, with not only the farm on property, but the deliberate and intent to go out and contract with local farmers and farmers markets, and to put pressure on the restaurants to have more healthy, sustainable food and the food that they serve. And we actually experienced that. We tried 3 different restaurants, and all of them had that theme taking place in those restaurants. So that's a second one. Then, and of course, the wildlife. They have 72 protected species, and they inventory all of those. They actually have had to change the design of the resort in order to accommodate wildlife corridors and make sure they weren't going to disrupt the ecosystems that way. And they found ways to use reed beds to hide the water, or store the water, not hide it, but to store it during the wintertime, so they never, ever have to go into the aquifers for their water supply. Wow. So that's a pretty major one. And the one that they didn't think was that big a deal at first, but I think it's huge. They made a commitment. We talked about Walt Disney making the commitment to have 1/3 of their land never developed. They made a commitment at Village Nature to have 90% of their land never developed. Tell me another developer that's ever made that kind of commitment.
Yeah, wow, that's crazy.
So a couple more questions and we'll wrap it up. Do you think there's aspects of some of the things you talked about already at Disney parks, with their conservation efforts that they've promoted at Animal Kingdom, with their repurposing or recycling trash throughout all 4 of the parks? I'm sure they do a lot of different things at Disneyland. Is there a thought or maybe an idea that Disney and other partnering companies would bring this specific type of theme park or, what was the term? Sustainable tourism park to the United States?
Well, I think they're already doing that, maybe not to the degree that they are in Village's Nature, but you've got to also keep in mind that resorts like Shanghai Disney are way ahead of Walt Disney World also because of a number of factors. One, they're newer, so they have the opportunity to have the newer and better technology from the very beginning. In China, they also have the advantage of having a culture that is more accustomed to these kinds of ideas and trends than we are in the U.S. as well. But I think Disney has a long-term commitment to keep improving. They really are making progress to achieving that goal of becoming a net carbon zero company, and they're the only corporation I know that literally taxes all their business units on the carbon they use. And so that gives every single business unit, whether you're ABC, ESPN, or the theme parks, or the cruise ships, or whoever, incentive to reduce your carbon. Because if you don't, it's going to show up on your bottom line. So that's pretty amazing. And they've got this plan, to do the zero waste. When they set their goals in 2008, they wanted a 50% reduction of carbon by 2012, and they achieved it. For waste, they gave them an extra year, 2013, but they actually had a 58% reduction in 2 years, primarily by going into their supply chain and getting the suppliers to stop giving them so much waste they didn't need. So they're finding very innovative and creative ways, and it's really affecting the bottom line, too, because this doesn't cost them money. It saves them millions each year in operating costs.
I can imagine. So, Dave, if people wanted to find you, where can they find you? And if they wanted to find out more information about the Village's nature and even your article, where can they find that?
Probably the best is the website bluecommunity.info, and there's a little tab there where there's a Disney section, and the Walt Disney Animal Science Environment team actually worked with me to co-produce 6 videos that I use in my course at the University of South Florida College of Global Sustainability. And so you can see those videos that we use in our course that have different Disney people telling how Disney does sustainable tourism in their operations in the company. So that would be probably one of the best places. And my contact information is on that website, and my bio is there as well.
Okay, that sounds great.
That's awesome. Well,
Anything
thank you.
else?
No, thank you so much for your time. Not least of which is hearing about this incredible, Village's nature, but just for the message of conservation and bringing this idea of sustainable tourism to light. And we could sit and talk all day about it, but it's late, so we know you have to go. But we just want to say thank you. It's just amazing.
Thank you. I listen to your show regularly, and it's given me a lot of good ideas and tips, and I really appreciate what you guys do. And we only have one planet, and so we ought to live as if we have one planet, not 3 or 5. And that's a concept that hopefully more people will get, and hopefully they'll get it sooner rather than later.
Yep.
Very
Absolutely.
good. Very good. All right. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate your time. And as we like to say around here, we'll see you in the parks.
The Disney Parks Podcast is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company. All Disney parks, attractions, lands, shows, event names, etc. are registered trademarks of the Walt Disney Company.
Like a boat out of the blue, fate steps in and sees